Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grid Live Wrap-Up. Joe Samyega here, along with Alex Anderson from the Gay Racing Podcast. We have Ben Schneider here from Ben Schneider's channel on YouTube and Kobe Lambeth from the Podium Finish. A big thank you to all of our patrons, investors, Colin Michelle, Mark, Robin, David, and our newest one, Matthew, for investing in the Grid Network each and every month. Without their investment, we having a hard time saying on air. They help us pay the bills, get to the track, and for 2024 we have the ambitious goal again to more tracks. We need $500 a month to get there for our entire team to go to more races. You can also do buy me a coffee or YouTube super chat to buy a cup of coffee or invest in a particular member of the Grid Network team. Just put in the message who the funds are going to, and we'll be sure to forward it to them. Now, as we're going to get on the air, Ben, let's start with you because it's Talladega, it's NASCAR. We anticipated craziness, wildness, but just before we go on the air, this all occurs, and I feel like we're entering Talladega, the show.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, Joe, we had a sold-out crowd for Yellawood 500. Great race at Talladega today, but right before we went on the air, Kevin Harvick was disqualified from the final race results. The car was disqualified for unsecured windshield fasteners. Harvick will be credited with a 38th place finish. He had originally come up a foot short of claiming the win at Talladega. So, Alex, we'll start with you on this big development. How disappointing is this for Kevin Harvick and Stewart-Haas Racing to have this happen?
Well, this was already disappointing for Kevin Harvick and Stewart-Haas Racing, being that close to getting that final win for Kevin Harvick. And, man, I hate it for them. I really hate it. And now they have this penalty and being disqualified. I'm glad they didn't win, and then getting the win taken away, I almost think that would be worse. Because it's like, oh, you get to celebrate, like, oh my gosh, this is my last win, we're celebrating. Stewart-Haas Racing, they just had a miserable year, we won, but then getting it taken away, that'd be worse, I think. So this is probably a better case scenario. As much as they would have liked to win, they would have gotten it taken away. So yeah, frustrating situation for them, Stewart-Haas Racing, but nothing you can really do about it. This is just an unfortunate mistake that these guys seem to have made.
An unfortunate mistake and a very costly mistake, because at the end, this is Kevin Harvick's last full season. I don't anticipate Kevin Harvick's going to want to come back and do super speedway racing on a part-time basis after retirement. I think he is done. He would have loved to gone out here and say, I won my last race at Talladega. Now we're entering the ROVAL. That's going to be really hard for Kevin Harvick to pull off a win. We know playoff drivers are hard to beat when it comes to the playoff races. Las Vegas, we got Homestead. We also have, of course, Martinsville, where it seemed that was sort of the one race where a lot of people remember Kevin Harvick lost the championship form and went from being a sure person to go into championship form to out of it. Overall, I think this just has to be hugely disappointing for him. For Stewart-Haas Racing, this has to feel like a big letdown. You just let down your driver in this. He did just about everything to get you all in position to potentially get a win this year, and this occurs, not having the windshield properly secure. This doesn't appear to be anything like trying to get a legal advantage, but rules are rules. He is disqualified and unfortunately dead last.
Well, obviously this changes the playoff point standings and also changes the stage results when a driver's disqualified. So all those calculations, I'm sure, are still being finalized. We don't have the graphics for you just yet, but of course we will report back to you on how it impacts the grid ranking as well outside the top 10 with the NASCAR part of that as well. Now let's get into the race recap, or excuse me, first we have a comment from Adam Lemery saying, you feel for Kevin Harvick was so close to getting a win today. Well, he thought he was so close to getting a win, and then he's going to end up he's going to end up with a NASCAR article, I guess, instead with a disqualification. So there you go. But we'll get into the race recap now. Stage 1 ended under caution with Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Kyle Busch, Christopher Bell, and Ross Chastain all getting collected in a crash. Chastain received the worst of it with Ryan Blaney winning the first stage. Chastain came in 12 above the cut line and is now below the cut line after finishing, we originally thought, in last place, now second to last with Harvick's disqualification. Since Ross won at Nashville, he's only had 3 top 10 finishes, Michigan, Darlington, and Texas. His best finish at the Charlotte Roval is 22nd in 2019, back when he was driving for Premium Motorsports. So, Alex, I know it's never over until the checkered flag is waved, but with a track record like that, do you think Ross Chastain's championship journey is over now, or has it even been over for a while?
I don't know if his chances are necessarily over. I think he can still point his way in, possibly. I don't think he's by any means a championship favorite. I don't think he'll make it to the round of 4. But like he just hasn't really been a contender these playoffs, and ever since Nashville, quite honestly, I know a few races ago he ended up getting like a top 5 randomly, but that one team and Trackhouse as a whole, they've just kind of seemed off. So I mean, they're not in a good position. They're gonna need to get a lot of points at the Roval, and like you said, 22nd best finish with not even Trackhouse. That it ain't looking good. I wouldn't say that the odds are in their favor by any means, especially when you have Tyler Reddick also below the cut line. I I just feel like his odds are not looking too good, and I would say his championship's probably over, but you never know. Crazier things have happened before.
It does appear the championship hopes are over for him, unless the drivers ahead of him in the playoffs have bad luck early on and then don't collect any stage points. Looking at the drivers with 20 points or less, Martin Truex Jr. last we saw, he was, I believe, 19 or 17 points above the cut line. We don't know the exact number now with the Kevin Harvick disqualification, but if somebody like him was to have bad luck early on, crash out, finish dead last, and Chastain had a career day at the Roval, you could probably get in. But I think it's starting to look pretty doubtful, and one of the things I'm curious about, last year we know a lot of folks were caught by surprise with Trackhouse Racing quick rise to being up front winning, and now we're starting this slowly. It seems like getting back to reality of what they were anticipating. Maybe everyone's getting used to the new cars. I'm just really curious. Do you all believe that this is just something of like a reality check that, okay, that first year with the new car, that was all great and dandy, but now here we are, this much time with the new car, and you're starting to fall to maybe where you are traditionally a little bit in the mid pack and not exactly a front runner.
Yeah, I think that could certainly play a part of it. I think everybody was dealing with the same kind of unknown last year of a next gen, but maybe that gives a new team or newer team, I should say, like Trackhouse, a little bit of a leg up over some of the bigger teams that they wouldn't otherwise have in any other year. And now that we have a year under our belts with this new car, every track we're going to, I guess, except like Chicago, a new track on the schedule, we have some data that you can take with the next gen car going back to these tracks. So maybe that's played into Trackhouse's disadvantage a little bit. Maybe it hasn't, but Ross Chastain, is still, I think, outperforms a lot of people's expectations given how new of a team Trackhouse is. Still getting a win this year, making it to a round of 12 at minimum. Again, he's not entirely out of it just yet. I still think they're performing relatively well based on where they should be historically with new teams coming into the Cup Series.
Yeah, with Trackhouse, I think there's two different things going on. One, Ross Chastain's not driving the way he was last year, because last year he was super aggressive. He was just over aggressive at times, and it made him drive better. And we just haven't really seen that. And then I think Suarez is running about where he was in the first place, so I don't think anything's really changed there. But with these cars, I wonder if after last year they like exceeded expectations, if they didn't make too many changes going into this year. That's just a theory. So maybe that's what's going on there. But I really think with Chastain, though, he's just not driving as aggressive after complaints from all of his fellow drivers.
We'll see what Chastain can do next week at the Roval. Let's get back to the Talladega recap here. The second stage again saw similar racing, two wide and green flag pit stops. It was a caution-free stage won by Brad Keselowski. William Byron was up there as well, taking away potential potential points, I guess, regular points for other playoff drivers. But let's talk about Denny Hamlin real quick. He had a penalty on pit road, lost his position with the other Toyota drivers that pitted. He did not receive the free pass, so he ended up starting stage 3 one lap down despite getting that caution at the end of the second stage. Joe, we'll go to you first on this one. Hamlin is notorious for pit road penalties. How costly of a mistake was this for him?
It was quite costly because we were seeing how he had to be up towards the front in the big pack of cars, and that is where the trouble occurs. I feel he got lucky. The big one, well, sort of the big one before the finish that got him on the lead lap occurred behind him. But if that was in front of him, his day is over, and he would be in a really bad spot. He had a really great opportunity, I think, if he was on the lap down to be up there battling for the stage points, collecting those stage points, because we saw up there he had a fast car all day. So he missed out on that while William Byron was collecting a lot of stage points. So even though he came out at the end looking like he salvaged something, a top 5 finish, he missed out on stage points. At Talladega, he really put his faith in the nature of the races because when that crash occurred behind him, he was back on the lead lap, but we knew Austin Cindric was battling really hard to stay for that first lap car.
Yeah, this was interesting. Like, ultimately, it didn't really matter too much. I mean, he still finished third. But with him, he still got through the race, and that's what he needed to do. So I think he did everything he needed to do. But having that speeding penalty, there's a different alternate timeline here where these cautions don't happen and he stays a lap down and finishes in the 30s or low 20s. And then he's like, what, plus 10, 15 above the cut line. So it was a very risky game he was playing. He ended up not getting the wave around the first time, with Carson Hocevar getting it instead. And then he was battling, like you mentioned, Ben. He was with Austin Cindric fighting really hard. And they were just going really back and forth, and it looked like they were side by side for a lot of that run. Then he finally gets the lap back. Then Cindric got his lap back too eventually. And then he worked his way back up there. But he just cannot make that kind of mistake later on. And I think Denny Hamlin, he is known for having a lot of speeding penalties. He'll say otherwise on his podcast, but he's well known for making these mistakes on pit road, having these speeding penalties quite often. But yeah, we'll have to see what happens in the coming races. It's just, hopefully he's done with them, because he had one at Bristol, he won that race. He had one at Talladega, he came back again today. But there's going to be a time where he ain't going to get so lucky.
Yeah, certainly makes his job harder. Would make it easier if he didn't have to come back up through the field and recover from those penalties. So we'll see if he can get those under control. In the meantime, let's get back to today's race. William Byron had gained 18 stage points after the first 2 stages, the most of all drivers entering stage 3. It's 18 points Byron prevented from any other playoff driver collecting. Bubba Wallace entered stage 3 with 0 stage points earned on the day. Those two fought hard for the win last weekend. The third stage saw 3 wide and even 4 wide until a caution came out for a second crash. Brad Keselowski, the winner of stage 2, was taken out of the race after making contact with Carson Hocevar. This caused a red flag on the safer barrier, or to work on the safer barriers rather, and repair those from the hit. Now, an interesting interview took place between Dave Burns and Brad Keselowski on the contact with Hocevar. Keselowski said he didn't feel like he hit Carson that hard, and that maybe Carson's car was handling not so well, or he may have dragged the brake too much. The two talked, agreeing that it was a racing incident. Hocevar also commented, he said he didn't think that too much of the blame could be put on Brad, that was just kind of drafting and super speedway racing. Keselowski finishes 33rd, does gain 10 stage points, and he is above the cut line by 2. His best finish at the ROVAL is 5th. It's his only top 10 finish there. Alex, how do you compare Keselowski's chances of advancing compared to those behind him below the cut line?
I honestly think he's still in pretty good shape, because, I mean, he is right there. But I think his main competition is Tyler Reddick. Tyler Reddick, in my opinion, is probably the favorite going into the ROVAL. We'll have to wait and see what happens. Just with him, I think if he can just get a bunch of stage points, he'll be able to make it on through, because guys like Martin Truex, I know Truex is like plus 17 or so. I know it's a lot of points, but he's just running like in 20th every week right now. If Brad gets stage points, I think he could like eclipse Truex possibly. I mean, when you look at it, Brad might not advance out of this round, but it won't be for a lack of trying, because Brad's had a heck of a season, had a heck of a round as well. We'll just have to wait and see what happens with him. But yeah, I would say Tyler Reddick is one he's going to have to definitely compete with next week.
Tyler Reddick, he's so good on the road courses, he has to be one of the drivers to watch next weekend, and Brad Keselowski knows that. The nice part I feel for Brad Keselowski, Kyle Busch, he's way back there. He's going to need stage points to just get out of that deficit, try to get ahead of him. Stay ahead of Kyle Busch, you're in a good spot. Bubba Wallace, he's been improving on the road courses. We know that's not his greatest strength, but I think, again, Brad Keselowski has the upper hand on that. And then, as you mentioned, Alex, too, is there seems Martin Truex Jr. not exactly where he was pre the postseason. And then the other driver I'm starting to wonder about, Christopher Bell. He doesn't seem to be really standing out, making a whole lot of noise in the playoffs. today he got caught up with that mess with Ross Chastain. Yes, last year he did sort of walk-off run that people use for being a must-win, coming here getting a win at the Roval, but he can't do that every year. I just feel like that kind of luck's going to run out, and I just not convinced that Christopher Bell could really advance because I just think he's not in a situation to do so with that team. Doesn't seem to be 100% there. I just think Christopher Bell could be a driver that Brett Keselowski could look at as we need to jump this driver in positions and points.
And that's a great point about Bell because that's another team who's had a lot of issues on the pits. And if they do that at the Roval, they're going to be in big trouble. They can't afford any sort of mistakes at 20. I mean, before the Harvick penalty, they were 22 points above the cut line. That might be changed now. I mean, that's not a lot. Like, let's say Keselowski gets a whole bunch of stage points. That deficit goes way down. So it's going to be interesting. I think Bell, another driver to keep an eye on, I think, might be Kyle Larson. He's had weird bad luck happen at the Roval to him. I think he'll be okay, but he has just had bizarre things happen to him before there. But he also made it through Talladega today, which he doesn't do that a lot either. So maybe he'll make it through this time.
Well, let's talk about the finish and the battle for the win. The last lap started after one more caution with debris with Ryan Blaney and Kevin Harvick, each leading a lane by a foot. Blaney wins and moves into the round of 8. It's his second win of the year. Dylan McCollum saying, YRB Nation, we are back. Alex, you were talking to us backstage. I think this is a reference to YRB, Young Ryan Blaney Nation. Is that correct?
That is right. Yep, it's YRB.
All right, well, Joe, let's talk about Blaney here then. He was not exactly in a must-win situation, still 2 races left, but it might have felt like one given how Penske and Ford have run this year with that program. Could this rejuvenate Team Penske for a potential upset sometime in the round of 8 and put them on the path towards a championship 4 run?
It does put them on essentially a path to potentially get a win at Las Vegas, but the other track I'm thinking they should really focus on, Homestead potentially, because we know you have William Byron. That team is looking at the mile and a half over Las Vegas since they won the last race weekend. He's probably going to have a really great car. Ryan Blaney seems to be hit or miss in Las Vegas. There was years where he's up there towards the front fighting for wins, and then years the car is not handling well. If the team feels like they have a better shot at Homestead, because nobody's really thinking about that race, maybe focus a little bit more on the Homestead setup so that way you got a good fast car there. Still, Vegas, that would be ideal because then you could have 2 additional race weekends to focus on Phoenix for the championship. But overall, I think this has to really be motivating for Team Penske. You got a team in the round of 8. You could work towards getting one more win to get into championship 4 because still, he's going to have that deficit. He's probably going to be in the lower half of the playoff standings once we reset, unless we get something really crazy at the Roval. So he's going to be nearly in a must-win situation. Go out there, try to find a win at Vegas, or consider Homestead.
That's interesting you mentioned Homestead, because I was thinking for Blaney, his opportunity is probably Las Vegas, because that's where Joey Logano won a year ago to make it to the championship 4. And also, Blaney is a driver who did win on a mile and a half earlier this year at the Coke 600. And I think Vegas is a track that really suits Blaney more so than Homestead. I think Homestead, that might be a Tyler Reddick, Kyle Larson, maybe William Byron race. I don't know if you can really compete with those guys there unless something weird happens. We'll wait and see. But Ryan Blaney, another track I would think about for him is Martinsville, because that's where the Fords have been a lot better at this year. The mile and a halves have not been their strong suit. That's mainly been a Chevy and Toyota show. But my main concern with Ryan Blaney is Team Penske, they just really haven't been there this year. I mean, I could just said Logano won Vegas last year, but he's not even in it right now. He's out already. And Penske as a whole is just not fully there. Blaney's kind of been the shining spot of that team this year. But I don't know. And also with Blaney, whenever he makes it to the round of 8, he kind of just implodes. Because if you recall last year, he spun coming off a pit road at Homestead, for example. I just worry that with him, he's going to have to win one of these races in the round of 8 to advance. And even if he competes for that, is he going to be able to fulfill it and go all the way through? I don't know.
Well, we almost got through the end of the race without crashing. We did finish in regulation for once at Talladega, but at the end of the race, Corey LaJoie got into Riley Herbst and initiated a big wreck. Unfortunate to see so many cars get torn up like that right at the finish, but the top 5 made it through without getting collected. 28 cars in total on the lead lap, 29, I suppose, if you include Kevin Harvick, who, of course, finished all the laps but was disqualified. 32, again, including Harvick finishing the race under power in some capacity, and 70 lead changes among 24 different drivers, one of the most competitive Talladega races, I would say, since the tandem drafting era. So, Alex, we'll start with you. How did Talladega live up to or maybe even exceed your expectations?
This was one of the most enjoyable super speedway races I've watched in quite a while, and on my podcast, I was like very against them during the Gen 6 era. I was just like, this is stupid. All we're doing is wrecking. We have to wreck 10 times before we get to the finish. But we haven't done that this year really at all. Like there were some issues like at the Daytona 500, for example. But otherwise, it's been pretty tame and a lot of fun races to watch this year on the super speedways. And Talladega, I usually go into this race feeling like, okay, how many times are they going to crash? Oh, they're going to be several big ones. But no, this was a very fun race. And honestly, like you mentioned, I think this is one of my favorites since about 2011, 2012. It was a lot of fun.
It was a fun, enjoyable race, and not just only in the lack of crashes we had. We didn't have the repetitive restart crash, overtime restart crash. We also didn't have situations where we had single file train up against the wall where they were just flat out and you couldn't make that inside line work. We had good racing overall. The four wide we had occasionally, the drivers, wow, they were on top of it. They didn't cause any crash. At the end, Savar, that crash, it just seems like that was just a racing incident. When you have a driver racing in the Cup Series on a substitute basis, getting pushed by a very aggressive driver, mistakes happen. And overall, I feel it was just, as Alex said, I thought it was a really good race in general. The big one, sometimes just part of this package of racing. We know they could sometimes go without it, but it looked like in this case, Riley Herbst just gave the smallest of opportunities for Corey LaJoie. They're coming to the check flag. Corey's not going to lift up. That just sets off the big one. It's unfortunate to see, but overall, I would say I give this race some good marks because at the end, we didn't have some of the nonsense in past races, and truly good racing from start to finish. No single file trains just throughout the stage.
Well, Alex, I understand you have to head out, so we're going to give you the chance before the end of the show here to give us your one shining moment from the race weekend. So what is that moment for you?
Yes, thanks, Ben. So I'm heading out, but my shining moment for this week is to Ryan Preece and Chase Briscoe. I have found this whole Talladega Nights thing that they've been doing all week to be a lot of fun. When it was like first rumored, like some like car got leaked or something. I was like, this is gonna be kind of silly. It's like, okay, Priest flipped Daytona. I get it, haha. He's in the air, but like it was actually really good. And Stewart-Haas Racing's marketing team and social media team deserve a lot of praise for it. Like they went all out. They're recreating scenes from the movie. I was very impressed. And hey, Ricky Bobby led some laps at Talladega today. That's pretty cool, and the actual paint scheme and everything. So yeah, that's my shining moment. I had a lot of fun following all that this week.
Thank you for that, Alex. Thank you for coming on tonight to discuss the Talladega race with us. And now we will bring Kobe back in for an update on the World Rally Championship.
Thanks, Ben. And World Rally Championships, Rally Chilie saw Ottonic return to the top step of the podium. Thierry Neuville and Elfyn Evans rounded out the podium finishes. Collie Rovanperä came home in fourth and eliminated Neuville from championship contention, leaving his teammate Evans as the only driver that could overtake him. Evans is 31 points behind Rovanperä and needs to close the gap to 30 or less. 25 more points for the win, top 10 score points, and 5 points for the winner of the power stage. Joe, do you see it being much of a battle for the championship the rest of the way, or does Rovanperä, as we like to say here, have one hand in the championship already?
I do believe he has one hand on the championship already, just because at 31 points, really, for Elfyn Evans, just to make a good, sizable difference to enter that last race with a fair, good shot at it, you need Rovanperä to have a horrible race, essentially, not score hardly any points, because at the end, 25 points for the win, and just like the F1 Formula E system, you got to go all the way down further in the top 10 before you get the single digits. Then you have the super stage, the final stage, 5 bonus points. Even if Elfin Evans was to go out there and get a win, and Robin Parra was in second place, he could just go for it on that final stage, try to get those 5 bonus points, and that will really help him out going from 18 points, closing the gap to the 25 points. So I see this as Robin Parra. He has one hand on the championship. Elfin Evans, he's going to have the pressure to race harder in this race, while Robin Parra, he could just stay right there within range of him like he did all weekend at Chile. Around him, behind him, but not too far. So at the end, some points were gained. But the other thing too, you got to figure out is if we have a driver like Altonic, after getting that win, he's probably feeling good. He's going to try to come back, get another win. That just makes it harder for Elfin Evans to try to catch up because those 25 points are so valuable. I anticipate Colorado Pera is going to be in the top 4, so he's going to score more than 10 points. I think it's going to be over by the time we get to Japan, just a more formality that, okay, we still have this championship battle, but unless Colorado Pera crashes and Elfin Evan wins and gets the power stage points, I think it's over.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I definitely think it's over by now. And as we've seen this year in World Rally Championship, we haven't seen, the someone completely take over and dominate. There's been a lot of inconsistency across the board in this series, and I haven't really seen, enough where Kali Rovanperä can be the throne. So I think he'll more than likely end up getting him another World Rally Championship in 2023, and also Toyota Gazoo Racing ended up clinching their 3rd consecutive manufacturers championship with 2 rallies remaining in the season. At the end of the month, we got the Central European Rally in Germany, and then middle of November, season finale, Rally Japan. And Thierry Neuville will try to hold off Octonic for 3rd in the championship standings. And next, we're going to bring Ben back in for MotoGP, the Japanese Grand Prix, which got a little wet.
Thank you, Kobe. Yes, the Japanese Grand Prix saw some drama we didn't necessarily expect. Rain started to fall 5 minutes before the start of the race. Everyone came into the pits after the first lap except for 4 riders. That gave us some names up front we don't always see there. Michel Pirro, the substitute Ducati rider, led the first 3 laps. Espargaro led 20 laps ahead of Marquez and Bagnaia. Martin, however, was the one that took the lead with 18 laps to go. The red flag then came out with 11 to go as the rain intensified and track conditions deteriorated. The race hit the halfway point, so full points were awarded if the race didn't resume, and it did not. Martin swept the weekend, and now was only 3 points behind Pecco Bagnaia. So, Joe, who in your mind had the better race here, Jorge Martin or Pecco Bagnaia, given where they are in the standings?
Easily Jorge Martin. Jorge Martin, start from pole. He did not exactly have the greatest start. He went wide, fell back. This could have been Pecco Bagnaia's opportunity to go out there, just run away. But with these wet conditions that we started getting, started off with just a light rain at the start that what caught Jorge Martin out. Next thing you know, he was just catching up lap after lap, and I was just so impressed with how he was just really finding the grip out there to the point where he was doing wheelies, trying to keep the bike down on the ground. I was just so amazed by him. This felt like a championship drive from him to then get around Pecco Bagnaia, then start pulling away, getting the lead. Pecco Bagnaia made a mistake. I thought he's going to fall off. He did not. He managed to stay on, and I feel pretty confident that even if the race did get restarted, Jorge Martin, I think he has the confidence. He has the momentum. That team is feeling really good. They're bringing it to the Factory Ducati team. They got this championship swagger, and I think this was just a great battle between the two. Then we talked about this could be a battle of mind games. This is truly what we saw because at the end, Pecco Bagnaia, he was following Martin, just seeing where was he beating him, especially off the corners. No other rider this entire race was getting the kind of grip Jorge Martin was, and Jorge Martin was on medium tires. Alexius was on the soft tires. He had a great drive, but then it faded much quicker. Martin was just on a next level, and if he keeps this up in Indonesia, where we could see weather occasionally, Pecco Bagnaia, his championship lead is in danger.
Well, let's talk about Marc Marquez. 3rd place finish in what could be his last Japanese Grand Prix with Honda. The Marc Marquez watch is on. We've seen him complete a couple of full-distance Grand Prix races. This one wasn't the full distance, but it was still his first Grand Prix podium finish in a while, of course, with all the injuries that he's been dealing with the last couple of years. Joe, rumor is that the deal is done. He's moving on from Honda, but if not, could this be the progress needed to potentially keep both sides together here in a deal at the 11th hour?
I don't know if this is the kind of performance that could get a deal made in the 11th hour between the two of them. Marquez, he looked great, but how would things gone without the weather conditions? He was seventh. We saw some riders like Brad Binder. He went out early. Maverick Vinales, first lap, first corner went out, caught off by the damp track conditions. There was a lot of factors that played into Marc Marquez's hand. I think reality, while Honda, Marc Marquez were put on the face of this is exciting, this is promising, this is the progress we're making. I think at the same time they got to realize, well, look at all the opportunities we had that just worked out for us. There was one point as well too. Marc Marquez, he almost lost it too. That could have been a moment too where he has done so too many times, lose the bike while racing towards the front. He has sort of dropped that attitude of if I don't go for the win, I'm not going for the win or crash out. Just get those podiums. That's what he's been doing. I think it's great, building something, but I just don't know if this was good enough for him, Honda, to salvage something for the future.
Well, Joe, MotoGP has unique rain rules, and all drivers are required to swap bikes from dry to wet setups. If the race doesn't go 3/4 distance, there are no results, but it just hit halfway, and because of that, there are full points. I'm sorry, there might be a mistake. I guess if it goes, maybe if it starts in wet conditions, then potentially. I apologize, Joe. I'm not exactly sure what the script is saying it. Why don't I just give it over to you and let you explain the rules here? I admittedly don't follow MotoGP as closely, but and in explaining the rules, how do you think race control handled the conditions that were not so predictable in this race?
Not a problem. It was something else because since the race was going to start under wet conditions, but everyone had their dry bikes, they didn't postpone the start. As soon as the white flags started waving, they have the option to then go in and make the pit. So we saw several riders stay out, hoping this rain will stop. Had MotoGP said, okay, it's starting to rain, we know weather's coming, let's postpone the start by 10 minutes so everyone could get their bikes, the wet bikes, come to the grid, this would have made it a much different race because then everyone had wet bikes and would go race, and then if it dries up, well, that's going to be a whole new ball game essentially, or race. Overall, I was surprised. I thought we were going to hear a lot more criticisms of race control, especially when Vinales, first lap, first corner, couple bikes got caught up with the damp conditions, went off. His race was ruined essentially. So big thing was for him, I thought he was going to be very critical that we should have just waited, started with the wet conditions with the wet bikes, be a much straightforward race. But we didn't hear that. At the end, it seemed like a lot of riders were pretty pleased with how race control has used this race. And okay, here's how we're going to handle wet conditions. Once we started seeing the riders putting the hands up that it's too wet, the conditions are too dangerous, immediately we then saw the red flag came out. A little late for Johan Zarco. He crashed out, and then he had this unique circumstance where he entered pit road through a shortcut. Since he entered through a shortcut and not the regular route, he could not restart the race, but the race didn't restart anyways because of the wet weather. So overall, it seemed race control did a really good job. I was surprised by it. I thought we were going to see some riders being critical of how the start of the race went and then the distance too, because if they had done one lap earlier, the red flag came out, and then you do the count back lap, points would have been awarded, and next thing you know, it would be a much different situation in the points battle. But even Pecco Bagnaia, he said race control handled it really well. So it was a surprise to me because I thought we were going to hear a lot more noise, but we didn't. And I think this is something at least MotoGP could feel like, hey, we don't have people being critical of how we handled the race this weekend.
Thank you for that, Joe. And again, apologies to everybody. It was a scramble just before we went on the air, obviously, with the news of the Harvick disqualification, so didn't get a chance to fully read through the script like I normally do. But, Joe, I appreciate the explanation for that and the recap on the Japanese Grand Prix this weekend. Now I'll hand it back over to you for an update on the grid ranking.
Yeah, the grid ranking. We don't have the full ranking out yet just because of the disqualification of Kevin Harvick at Talladega. But that does not impact the top 10 because in the top 10, there are no NASCAR Cup Series drivers. NASCAR Cup Series drivers, the lack of consistency has seen them lower. The big change, Francisco Bagnaia, Pecco Bagnaia, and Jorge Martin, they are now tied in the top 10 at 14.58. Brock Feeney got around Kyle Rosberg since Kyle Rosberg did not get a podium finish. So those were the only major changes this race weekend. Next race weekend is going to be really exciting. Bathurst 1000. Shane Van Gisbergen and Brody Kosecki, they could potentially still get around Alex Palou. But here's the situation. Whichever driver does not win the race, their hopes of getting around Palou is over. So they'll be down to 3 drivers. Max Verstappen, Alex Palou, and whoever from Supercar Series does not win. So it's going to be very exciting as we're getting closer and closer to the conclusion of the grid ranking with next race weekend. Formula One, the Bathurst 1000, and the NASCAR Cup Series as they continue their playoffs at the Charlotte Roval. Now it's time for everyone's one shining moment.
That's right, Joe, and I think it's going to take a historic collapse for Max Verstappen not to hang on to the grid ranking lead at this point, but we'll see what happens. Still a few races to be run in most series in the grid ranking. In the meantime, Kobe, I'll hand it over to you first. What is your one shining moment from this weekend in motorsports?
I have to give it to the driver to number 36 for Riley Hurst. I think he did a really great job all throughout the day at Talladega. I think he earned a lot of respect from the competitors in the NASCAR Cup Series. I know his NASCAR Xfinity Series career, has had some good moments and some not so good moments as well. And it's been a really tough 2023 season for him on the Xfinity side of things. But to come in here and have a really good race, getting the top 10 finish at Talladega, I think that this is definitely a nice confidence boost for Riley Hurst in his racing career. Prove to himself that maybe someday he can race on Sundays full time.
My shining moment has to come for the MotoGP, and that's going to go to Jorge Martin getting the win. He swept the weekend, pole, sprint race win, pole for the Grand Prix, and then to get this win. And there was a moment, as I mentioned, when he went wide, he lost positions. This could be easily a moment where he lost his cool, started pushing it too hard, goes out in treacherous conditions. That did not happen. He rebounded back. He took the lead away and went down towards the front, led. Here comes the red flag. Even with that race had restarted, I was very confident he would get the win. I know a couple folks got on pick a winner, but Jorge Martin, he is making it exciting in the MotoGP Championship standings. So he's getting my shining moment.
I'm going to give my one shining moment to Ryan Blaney, a clutch win at Talladega today. And if you go back and look at the margin of victory combined in his 3 Talladega race wins, it would be a close finish if that was the margin in one race, let alone spread out over 3 victories. Every time there's a photo finish at Talladega, look no further than Ryan Blaney for who's going to come out on top there. That is my one shining moment from this weekend in the motorsports world.
A busy weekend in the motorsports world, and of course we have a lot to talk about, including Grid Encore tomorrow right here on YouTube. So be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon, because Ben, I know we have a hot topic for tomorrow, and it's from Talladega.
Yeah, that's right, Joe. We've got a little bit of ARCA action with the main series at Salem and the West Series out at Roseville. We've got the modifieds at North Wilkesboro, so that's going to be interesting to talk about. I know Brandon is going to enjoy getting a chance to talk about them, and the news with North Wilkesboro getting a repay. But yes, as you mentioned, the big news coming out of the series we usually cover, I think everybody's still talking about it. I just saw, I think Nick Sanchez's mother released a statement on Facebook to give her side of the story. Crafting released his side of the story earlier today on his social media accounts. But yes, the fight, or maybe assault, I think is perhaps the more appropriate word, with Matt Crafton and Nick Sanchez there, and then the threats that Nick Sanchez handed back to Matt Crafton. I know Brandon certainly has some strong thoughts. He's not too happy with either of them. And Matt Crafton is on a consecutive start streak in the Truck Series that dates all the way back to before his current ThorSport teammate Haley Deegan was even born. So there's a lot on the line for him should he be suspended. I've got a feeling he's not going to be, even though I certainly would not be too heartbroken if he was suspended for his actions this weekend, because I think they are entirely unacceptable, especially for a 3-time champion who's been in the series as long as he has. But like Jeff Gordon in 2012, going into Homestead on, again, another long consecutive start streak, I've got a feeling they're probably not going to want to mess with that and he may get away without one of those suspensions, but we'll just have to wait and see. I am sure the penalties will be out by Tuesday or Wednesday, and then maybe Kobe can come in and discuss those on Grid Tonight later in the week. But certainly no shortage of things to talk about, so make sure you tune in to Grid Live Encore tomorrow night, 7 Eastern, 6 Central, 4 Pacific. You know how time zones work. You can figure it out from there.
Definitely encourage everyone. Grid Encore, that's going to be a very great topic. And of course, in the chat room, we'd love to hear your opinions, thoughts, and questions as well. And then Tuesday or Wednesday, when the news come out, we're going to have everyone on Grid Tonight to discuss whatever actions NASCAR has taken, plus all the latest motorsports news, including the Brickyard 400. That's going to be back in 2024. It's going to be really interesting to see how the season schedule lines up with the All-Star race coming out. We know the Brickyard's coming. It's going to be really interesting to see how everything starts coming together. And be sure to subscribe to us right here on YouTube so you don't miss any of our programs, including Women in Motorsports. We're going to be back on the air Friday. If you missed the last couple of episodes, you could go to our channel, go to the playlist Women in Motorsports, and see everything we've been talking about, including the NHRA, as they're getting closer and closer to their season finale race. And once again, a big thank you to our Patreon subscribers. Colin Shell, Mark Robin, David Matthew, investing in the Grid Network each and every month. And of course, you could do the same thing. Link in the video description. Also, link in Buy Me Coffee. You want to buy a cup of coffee for anyone in the Grid Network team, including myself, Ben, Kobe, Alex, and then of course we had Isha and Josh earlier in the weekend. For Kobe Lambert from the Podium Finish and Ben Schneider, I'm Joe Samaniego. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time. Thank you for watching us right here on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and check out some of our other videos, including Life on the Grid, where we interview folks from the motorsports industry. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.